but there is a large portion of the country in the south, center, and east that should be preparing ground right now and actually planting, and they're not. So, and depending how long this drags out, they may not be able to do that. So we shall see how that. Most of the hemp farmers are not down there, so this will not affect our supply to Canada, to Europe. I've been planting hemp for 6 years now. This is my 6th year. We are an organic farm. I'm doing a little over 5,000 acres right now. I was with Renaissance Capital back 10 years ago. We built one of the largest farms in the world. We had 750,000 acres. But I exited that company in 2017 and went completely on my own. And we're doing hemp, we're doing genetics, and we are now doing our own varieties. We are getting away from the Ukrainian Hemp Institute, which pioneered many of the low THC grain and fiber varieties starting in the 1930s. So we are now, we had an extremely good trial with the University of Kentucky trials with Bob Pierce, and in many of the universities where we, that were central US and north, our Lara was by far the best producer of fiber of all the varieties that were included. There were about 20 varieties in this trial. So we're very excited about bringing that into the country. And well, we're going to bring a few tons in this year and give it to a few key producers who are really expanding their fiber production. And next year we can bring in containers for sale in the US. We also have another variety, and this is about a 125-day, 130-day variety, which is a little longer than most other varieties that are in the US. And that's why some of the large fiber content, it actually shows. We are also introducing next year a very short variety called Maria, M-R-I-A, and that's going to be around 90 days. It's going to be an extremely fast variety. We're going to be on both ends, because currently our varieties, Celestia and Liana, which some of the people who are on this call know about, they're running from 110 to 120 days and about 100 to 115 days. And this one, the really early one will be about 90 days. And the Lara, which is a very high fiber variety, will be running at about 130 days. So we're going to be on both ends of the spectrum, depending on your weather and where you will be in the center to north of the U.S.
Awesome. Chris, you want to chime in and give a little bit about your background, and then we can start some questions? And
sure. Hey, who's this Roman guy?
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you? So yeah, I'm Chris Adams. I'm a 4th generation farmer out of eastern North Dakota, 50 miles from the Canadian border. I guess I got into hemp in 2016. We did 15 acres at a friends of mine a couple hours away from here. And then following that is when I started producing it more. I think I started with 300 acres and then went on to upwards of probably 1,200 of seed production for a couple years. And then I slowed it down a little bit because the market's a little bit flooded and I was storing it all for everybody in the country who wanted it. So I was getting sick of that part of it. So last year we still did about 500 acres, I guess. Still sitting on it, but it's all sold. We're just slowly hauling it as they can take it. So I guess that's a plus. We farm about 10,000 acres total. A lot of dry beans, wheat, sugar beets as well. But hemp obviously is another specialty crop that we add to our mix, which gets pretty tight with our schedule at harvest time. But we have a pretty nice setup for it. So it tends to work out well. We bought an old grain elevator, the wood, like thick wood wall, older elevator that has big dryers intertwined with it. So for us, that, we put it into the cribs wet, and that wood sucks a lot of the moisture out, but then we can run it through the dryers without heat, because the fan, it's just a great dryer. So the fan just blows the warm fall air through it, which will dry it out pretty rapidly. So it tends to work pretty well. So that's where we're at. This year, we were actually going to take a year off from producing, just to see what happens with the market. And because all the other crazy prices are coming up, and nobody's really offered anything to compare with the pricing. I mean, raising $10 wheat makes a lot more sense than raising 50 cents a pound hemp seed. So I'm having many people call and want me to grow 1,000 acres here and 1,000 acres there, and they'll escrow money, the whole deal that they should have been doing this whole time, but they haven't come up with a price. So I don't know where the market is today at that, if people are starting to get nervous because they're not going to be able to fill acres in their contracts, or how it's going to work. But that's kind of where I'm at personally. That could change before springtime, but yeah, so that's where I'm at. I've kind of done it all as far as CBD goes, which we all know what that's like these days. I baled up the crop pretty much from year one and just start stacking them on the side of the field, hoping in some future that they were going to start getting sold. And then I finally got rid of them all, 10 cents a pound. So it kind of was worth it now. So yeah. But
so this brings up one of the topics, right, that we were talking about, Roman, before we started is, if we're not planting on these additional acres and it's increasing costs like we have of the wheat and the corn and other commodities, what does that look like for hemp? I don't know if, Roman, you have any feedback, especially being in the heat of what's happening, or if anybody else has any specific questions, please chime in. I'd like this to be a discussion. I do have a list of questions that I'll ask, but yes, I would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have a presentation. It's more of a Q&A. Yeah. That's kind of how I roll anyway. So, I mean, whatever anybody wants to know, I probably, between Roman and I, have an answer. So.
Yep.
Well, we've decreased hectares this year substantially. Well, partly because of the war, but another part is that until the seed business picks up in the U.S. and in Canada, we're doing the trials. It's a 1-year trial period, and then you can sell them next year. Our European customers are down this year. U.S. is very flat, and but we are growing organic seeds, which works out to about $2,200 a metric ton, which I think is about $1.30 a pound. So we're delivering that to the Baltic states and to Romania right now. So we will stick with some of that, but we're planting about 300 hectares this year, which is about 800 acres. So it's down substantially from last year.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question that just came in wondering about what drones you guys use and for what purpose and who uses them. Drone technology.
Well, I guess I can start that one. Yeah, we do use it, not as extensive and techy as it can be, but we can. For the farm in general, we use it to map our fields out. You can take thermal imaging or whatever you want of it. So we kind of use it primarily for drainage purposes. So we'll go up and we'll snap pictures of all of our fields after rain falls. So we can see the low spots, water pooling up here or there. And then when we get those maps, we'll inlay them with our field maps And then when we put it into our software for ditching to make the drainages, we can, on our computer, we can draw the line where we want that to be created, which goes into our software of our tractor, and literally like we push a button and it'll go to that spot and cut out what we need to have it cut out so that water can get off the field. We use it some for nutrient basis. So when the crop is up green, you can snap a photo of it and it'll kind of dictate whether your fertility is kind of evened out throughout the field, or if you have green and light green and dark green spots throughout, then it kind of gives us an idea of how the spreader worked and how we can probably save a little bit on fertilizer costs that way. For hemp specifically, I've used it for footage. It's about it. You know, I raised CBD for a couple of the years, and I actually used it to spot male plants. So I would just fly it through the field, and then when I saw one from the drone, I would go in underneath the drone, pick it up, do the thing, go to the next one. And that's kind of how I utilized it. It could be bad though if it's already pollinating and then you're just blowing it all over the place. But most of the time you can catch it before then, and you can see what the plant looks like. You can hover it right over the top, so it works out pretty well. But that's what we've used it for. And there's a lot of other things that we could do with it, but it just isn't really that feasible or important to do with all of our other tech that we utilize already.
Roman, do you guys use drones?
We dabbled with it last year, and actually in our region, we all our fields have canals, and actually for the same purpose that Christopher was saying, that's what we would be using it for this year. We've got a real menace that's developed in the last couple. We've had a very rainy last couple of years, very rainy, and it's developed a lot of water. And our biggest enemy, and this is funny, but it's beavers, and we have hundreds of beavers all over the place. You can't get rid of them. You can't shoot them. You can't do anything. It's just, you just have to. We have now an army of guys, 8 guys in 2 cars that run around 5,000 acres looking for these dams and breaking them up. And what we want to do this year is, you know, sometimes it's difficult to see half a mile down in a field where there is a puddle, actually, and like Chris was saying. So we want to do that with the drones, and we will see those problems before they turn into big problems. We had probably about 150, 200 acres last year that was underwater, but we didn't see it because it was way out there in the middle of a field, and it was caused by beavers.
Gotcha. Okay, so question on the seed supply next year. Wondering how you anticipate. You know, you've mentioned that you've decreased the number of acres grown and seed supply for Europe due to the war. Where do you suspect, you know, how do we prepare for what's about to come, and what do you project as outcome for seed supply? Roman?
Oh, to me? Okay. Like I said, we're taking it slower than we did last year, and we're just going to slow down. And like I said, we're going to go through the trials in Canada. Europe is kind of flat. There are a couple of positive. The UK is going to be picking up next year, so we are putting some seed into the UK for trials. And in the US, we're going to be with our new varieties trying to focus on, you know, the 7, 8, 10 people who or groups that are organized growing for grain or for fiber. And because the distribution that we thought was going to develop is actually getting smaller and smaller, because less and less people are interested in growing that.
So guys, what do we do about that? How do we, now this is going to be a major impact, as we obviously are seeing it, like you said, Chris, here with increased price for wheat. You know, how do we balance this? Because we do have a number of processors coming on board that are going to struggle to fulfill that supply chain or their contracts. So what do you guys, you know, what do we anticipate? How to fix this? And if anybody else wants to chime in, they're welcome.
Well, you know, I don't know exact numbers, but I think a year of low production would probably still be okay for the industry because there's a ton of seed sitting around at people's farms. I mean, I don't know the number, but I know people couldn't get rid of it forever. And here's the difference on there. With the peroxide levels and all these companies needing near 0% peroxide, which is very impossible to do, by the way. I mean, they have unrealistic expectations. But what I think more people are going to is older grain because they can remediate the oxidized portion of the oil, that the bitter taste through their different processes. And for straight food like the hemp hearts, you can run them through color sorters and get most of the bitter pieces out because they're darker. You can decipher between the two. So my theory for quite a while is these bigger processors, and I know that it's just kind of coming on board now, the bigger ones, but I feel like a lot of the processors were waiting on purpose to get the cheaper grain. And I think there's probably more doing that now because of the better facilities they're building for processing and pressing. So like I mentioned, I think there's probably enough old seed around to kind of supply for a year, and if they can find it. I mean, I don't know all the growers that have it in their bin and don't know what to do with it. They probably won't be able to get a hold of those guys, but it's going to definitely shift the focus, I think, to the farmer for next year, because now it's kind of on the other hand. I've been storing it myself and holding on to it and having all these costs for storage and drying and maintaining and hauling and all this stuff that I've been carrying on my back for everybody, right? And that's my frustration with the whole industry, is just having to hold it for so long before somebody can take it. And by that time, 2 years, you're getting old grain now. You're getting some oxidation going on in there. So then you're devaluing your own grain because everybody's waiting on it. They don't take it right away. So I don't know. I think a year with low acres going in like this year, they probably can survive, but they're going to have to work to find the grain that's out there. And then after that, they'll have to really come up with some numbers.
Roman, do you have anything you want to add?
I kind of agree with what Chris is saying, but honestly, I just don't think my experience is that the oxidation actually is not always just in the discolored seed. It can be widespread, and I don't think you can really press or make hemp hearts out of stuff that's 2 years old. I have a hard time trying to buy that one, but maybe.
Roman, can you explain the difference between planting seed produced in a breeding program and hemp grain seed that is used for planting?
Yeah, sure. When we plant for our second reproduction, which is what we call our planting seed, we start with the first reproduction seed from the original seed. We will plant it in maybe 200 acres, 150 acres, 100 acres, somewhere around there. And it's usually planted in about 45 centimeters, which is about 18 to 20 inches. And when we'll get together 20, 30 people, and when they're flowering, we will run people through the field, and they'll be cutting down the males that are in the field. This is something we can afford to do in Ukraine because of the labor costs, which many people in U.S. and Canada don't do. And that's why our planting seed usually runs about 4, 5, 6% male when it's out there in the field, when the farmer is planting it or growing it. But a lot of the locally produced seeds in the U.S. and Canada don't do that step, and they end up with 20, 30, and even more percentage of males in the field. And that really hits your grain yields substantially. So that's the difference when we do that. When we plant just for grain, we'll plant that usually in 30 centimeter rows, which is about 12 12 inches. And there we just harvest with the regular, harvester and do the steps that Chris was talking about.
Okay. For seeds and genetics, for a new seed or genetic, how quickly do they stabilize? What's a time frame as we're looking, especially scaling at different places within the U.S. or around the globe? Roman?
Well, once you have a variety, like for instance, we've registered 2 varieties. It took a couple of years, about 3 years to develop them. And then it takes, from the foundation seed, which is usually just a couple of kilograms or 5, 6, 7 pounds, 10 pounds, then you have to propagate. So it takes you about 3 years after you register your variety to get to any kind of container quantities that you can start exporting and selling worldwide.
Okay. Chris, do you have anything you want to add to those?
So it's like a 5 to 6 year program.
Okay. I hope that answered the question, if it did. What about you?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
For the genetics side of it, I haven't really even dug into that part as far as figuring out my own varieties to use. But, to go back on raising for plantable seed here, there are certain monoecious varieties that, like Roman was saying, need to be roved for the male plants throughout. And, a lot of this stuff is coming from Colorado first, not the genetics. I just mean like the companies that have the rights to certain seeds to produce them. And the difference is, in order to get AOSCA certified in the United States, you have to meet certain qualities, right? And I've raised certified seed for probably 4 years out of the 6 or 7 or whatever I've been raising it. And I haven't had to rogue one time, and it still met the AOSCA specs to certify it, which is really the only, if I were to tell new growers at some point, I know there are some other varieties that are okay, and I've raised one, but that's kind of where you should target your varieties, are the ones that are certified. Then you know what you're getting. So, we've raised a couple different varieties of monoecious and dioecious plants, and, we've never had to come out and cut out males, and they're under 3%, and a lot of them are under 1.5% without even, from foundation to registered and registered to certified, the numbers are still under 3% or whatever the standard is to certify them. So, it depends on the area. It depends on the, probably the pollination, pollution, and all that to do with it. But yeah, we've never had to really hire anybody to go in there and yank the males out because they've been so clean already.
Roman, anything else you want to add? I've got a couple other questions I want to bring up.
Well, I didn't know that AOSCA actually has a percentage of males in a monoecious or a dioecious variety in their specifications. It's more or less, the quality of the seed, it's germination and moisture and things like that. I didn't think AOSCA actually did a percentage threshold of males.
Yeah, they do for monoecious varieties. Yeah. And some of the founders of the seed, or whatever you want to call it, who own the genetics rights, they can kind of set a number that needs to hit. They don't get to pick, but they have, some varieties are more strict than others. And that's where the problem lies in some of these varieties people are raising, thinking they need to spend $500 an acre on hiring people to go in there and rogue the males out when there isn't any contamination happening in the first place. So yeah, they definitely do for monoecious varieties. Dioecious, they check if there's any odd plants, but that's never a problem. That's 40, 60 is pretty much ideal there for males and females. So.
Okay, so There's a question about the availabilities of your seeds this year, Roman, and farmers or operations coming to the table late to plant. Is it a quick process? And what do you have available?
Well, we have our two varieties, Halesia and Liana, both in the U.S. We have stuff in Denver. We have some stuff in Missouri and a little bit of supply in North Carolina. So we're ready to go all the time. The Liana, which is the more fiber grain variety, we have in big totes, which are 2,000 pounds. And the Halesia, which is the more grain fiber variety, we have in 88-pound bags. But it's ready.
And what is the germ rate on those?
Anything from about 83 to 86 to about 93.
Same question, Sandra. How long before you get a seed certified? So we talked about like it a little bit in the beginning. Is that about 6 year process, 5 to 6 year process?
Well, it's about 3 years from the time you start developing it before you can actually submit it for certification. It takes about 3 years. And then about 3 years afterwards to propagate it to a usable amount.
Okay. And then another question that came up, I think, when we're looking at price competitiveness with these other crops and legalization of marijuana, spreading across the states or more states legalizing, Hector sees that, where do you see hemp competing with marijuana with more states legalizing and moving? He sees more people moving away from hemp, where I think some others within this call would argue that people are really starting to plant and scale up on the industrial applications for hemp. But what do you guys have for an opinion? Roman, Chris?
Well, I really don't have an opinion on that because I think the marijuana business and the industrial hemp business are completely different things. Just because the word hemp is in there, that doesn't mean they're related in any stretch of it at all whatsoever.
Yeah. What about you, Chris? Especially in the CBD market.
Yeah, I agree. Like, we're just talking about producers, so really that's all that really matters at this point. But I'm not as familiar with the marijuana industry and all the legalization going on, but I think it'll follow suit with the CBD thing. As long as it starts getting more legalized throughout the country, there's going to be more people jumping to it because it's marijuana and, there's tons of money in it, but it's going to happen. The same thing's going to happen. The early bird gets the worm. So the ones that are doing it and doing it well are going to be the ones that survive. And honestly, CBD is pretty important to have a quality product to start with, right? So scaling up acres on that for marijuana is even more stringent. So, unless you're going to do it the proper way and use, the proper curing and all that stuff, hand roguing. I don't really see a scale up marijuana farm working necessarily, and extractions come a long way. So there's that too. But, for CBD production, I wasn't going to hand harvest or hand dry or hand buck or anything. Like, my goal was to plant it heavy, 20,000 seeds an acre, even heavy. So you can't see the ground, no weed problems, nothing. Go in there, cut it down with a swather, let it dry in the field, pick it up with a chopper, and then I'd separate the materials afterwards. And that's what we did. You're not going to get 12% content of CBD when you do that, but you could get 6 to 8, consistently. Marijuana is going to be worse because there's way more trichomes hanging on a marijuana plant than any CBD plants. And that's just for more to fall off. So the percentage loss is going to be more significant in those applications. So again, I don't think it's scalable and actually survivable for the grower unless you do more niche, smaller grows where you're getting the premium product out of it. I don't know. I think it's just going to mimic what the CBD market did at some point here as it gets more legalized.
I'd like to talk about like what does scale look like for industrial hemp? What are we expecting to go in the ground? And I know there's a few of you on here that are seed distributors and working with other farmers and large groups, but yeah, I'm really curious about what's expected for seeds to go in the ground this next year for the industrial applications. Roman, do you have a good idea of what to expect? Daniel, I saw your hands up.
I don't know what I just had a question. I'll wait for the answer. Go ahead, Roman. Sorry.
Well, actually, I don't know because I haven't been to the U.S. now for about 9 months, and like in the last couple of years, I've been visiting people in about 19 to 22 states, and but I've been out of it, and because of a lot of issues, trying to get things moving here, we're actually trying to. Before this war happened, our goal was to do about 2,500 acres this year. Sorry, acres, 2,500 acres, and do a fiber project on top of the seeds that we would harvest on top of that. So it was going to be a dual project, and everything was ready to go, including 2 small decorticators that aren't far from my farm. And we were going to. The idea was to work with a couple of investment groups, put up these satellites around northwest Ukraine, that would do 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 acres, and do the grain and come back for the fiber. But everything just kind of grounded to a halt about a month and a half ago.
Yeah, Daniel, thank you very much. For everybody that doesn't know, he's a corporate member and a great sponsor or a great support of GHA. So have to give you a shout out. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you very much. So I have a question for really Christopher. Christopher, you mentioned that you were sitting a lot of product and people weren't coming and getting it from you. Are these pre-purchased orders for specific varietals, for specific products? And what are you guys seeing as cultivators as the primary offtake? Is it CBD? Is it fiber? Is it proteins? What are you being asked to grow? And then why would you have to sit on product if you've grown it and you have a contract with them? Why aren't they picking it up? I'm just curious.
Well, first, there's not a lot of people asking for CBD acres, and I'm like everyone else, that should never have been attached to the industrial part of it in the first place. I mean, it is hemp and it has its applications, but when we're talking for protein and fiber, I just think it's a whole different ballgame. But nobody's asked me to grow for that. But when I did, they were all contracted, of course. And then by the time harvest comes, they can't afford it, or they don't have any money to take it, or, the whole industry crashed. So it is what it is. But on the other side, on the grain side, every year that I've raised it, I've had contracts on it. And every single year that I've had contracts on it, the people that I contracted with never bought any of it. Maybe a load or 2 at the most. Wow. They just didn't buy any because they didn't have the market for it. They overestimated, I don't know why. So that's been every single year. I've sold all of it off contract every single year. 18 months after harvest, like it's getting to the point, and we're talking 2 million pounds at a time. So I understand not one person's going to buy 2 million pounds of grain. So I sell a load here and there as the year goes on. And by the end of it, I have a little bit left. And this year specifically, one company bought it all. I had 1 million pounds left and they're just buying it all. And we just have to haul it in and do it that way. But why they're not fulfilling their contract or their obligations, I don't know. I guess contracts don't really matter in the hemp world anyway, since they will, and they're starting to now. But that's what the problem has been. That's why farmers don't want to grow it. It's been kind of all risk on the grower, and they have no say in where it goes and when it goes and when they get paid. It's compared to growing wheat or soybeans or corn or whatever else you want to. You can haul those across the road and get a check the same day, right? And specialty crops are different, so I'm not trying to compare the two, but yeah, when you raise a product and you put in, you have $400 or $500 an acre into it, just for production wise, not counting the storage and the carryovers and drying and all that nonsense that adds to it, you don't get paid for it for 18 months or at all. By the time it gets too old, now you're not looking at 55 cents anymore. You're looking at 30 if you're lucky, So yeah, I don't know why, but every year so far, nobody that I've contracted with has actually bought it. I've sold it all off contract. So, and no contract ever says they'll pay you regardless by this time. They're always like, as it sells in the 18-month span, blah, 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 right? This growing year, I think, is going to be different because they're having challenges finding acres, so they're going to be more malleable for the grower, I would guess. But yeah, and even certified seed. The first year I raised it for a Canadian company, and that went okay. We sold about half of that, and I sold it for them on my own. They didn't sell a whole lot of it at all. So then I was sitting on that for a while, ended up having to sell that for a quarter because it was getting so old. The second time I raised it for seed, none of it sold. They didn't market it at all. So I didn't get paid on that until I got rid of it for grain at less than market price because it was a little older. Plus I had all the costs into it for certifying it every year we can do it for 2 years probably, and that's about it. Last year I raised it, 2019 crop year, I raised it, 2 varieties, contract for getting paid upon certification, and they'll take control of it as soon as it's bagged and certified. And I'm still sitting on all of it in the shed here, so they haven't come to get that either. So I'm pretty sure I have it all sold now for seed. So we'll see how that pans out. But that's the problem, everybody. Like, that's what we're dealing with. That's what I've been dealing with since year one of growing it.
And Christopher, do you see this as a processing problem? There just simply aren't enough processing facilities to take the raw materials and process it into the various products for market. Is that the issue, or is it just simply that the industry itself isn't sophisticated enough to have proper contractual agreements and financing, buyers for the raw materials?
Yeah, definitely both. And, I am probably speaking like I'm more frustrated than anything, but I understand those issues. I mean, if I didn't, I wouldn't keep producing it. So yeah, they definitely both have a problem, have to do with it. And that's just part of the growing industry. I'm willing to do the growing pains too. So those are reasons why I don't really, attach it to character or anything like that. I mean, I get how it works, and everybody's trying to do good for the industry. And I have a little bit of, leeway for that. But on the other side, there are plenty of, character missing people that I've dealt with throughout this too. So yeah, I don't know. It's both. The markets weren't prepared or ready. The processing facilities were taking a lot longer to come on board, and then the sheer marketing part of it. And there was an oversupply of grain from Canada that spilled over to the US because they were selling a lot of theirs into the US before, we started growing ourselves. So it's just a whole chain reaction that I know for sure is starting to level up. So that's a plus.
So, and I noticed that Daryl McElroy wants to jump in here. Just one final question. So in looking at this from a 10,000 foot level, it seems to me that one of the things that the industry needs first and foremost are adequate processing facilities to break down the biomass into the various key elements for production of whatever it might be, whether it's hempcrete or construction use, et cetera, clothing. And if there were processing facilities kind of dotted throughout the country, we might have a better season, if you will. But are there a lot of farmers out there with materials that they're just sitting on this year, right now, from last year?
In the region here, like the growers that I know around me, yes. And, they haven't been involved in the industry like I have. So they don't have as many, contacts or ways to get rid of it. So I tend to be the one that tries to lump it in with my own products to get rid of it. But yeah, pretty much everyone that I've consulted with to grow, just neighbors or counterparts around the state, they just dumped it all this year, probably for a quarter or less, because it was just getting old. And I know you meant this year's production or 21 production. Everybody that I've known that raised that is sitting on it too, unless it's organic, of course. That's pretty easy to get rid of if it is clean enough, and I know it can be. I know plenty of guys that do it the right way there, but yeah, definitely sitting on it still.
Daryl, I saw you chimed in also, or would like to. Feel free.
Yeah, I would just, okay, so Daryl McElroy, I work with a company called Fresh Hemp Foods. I look after the pedigree seed production for them. Also, I'm an agronomist for them, and I've been in the Canadian hemp industry for the last 22 years. I was one of the first growers to ever grow hemp. And Christopher, I do appreciate some of your comments for sure. And it is, even after 22 years in this industry, we're supposed to be one of the largest, if not the largest, hemp food company in the world. And we still only do like 35,000 acres a year. We do take all of our product in, Christopher. So maybe it's just some of the companies. I know that there was some and I know who the people that you were dealing with there too. So some of them, well, they were all startup companies, and like I say, if and I would say probably 75%, if not 80% of our hemp parts and our hemp wool does go into the United States. So there is a market down there. I think a lot of the problem why it's so limited is lack of public knowledge on omega-6, 3, 6s, and 9s and how good it is. There is definitely, and we've seen this since 2018, there's definitely a lot of people that are in the cannabis world are calling the product hemp. And that's really, in my opinion, and in our opinion up here, that's really kind of messing up a lot of the good that the hemp world is trying to do, for sure. As far as the fiber and herd, it's coming on for sure. We're seeing this up in Canada in the last couple of years, the potential, and right now, well, it's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing. When we get talking to people that want to buy the fiber and want to process, they want a year's supply on hand before they even start. That way, if there is a drought like we had last year, and at least they have a product that they can keep their machines going, you know. And one of the things that, this was back in, I guess, in 2000, I sent three bales, 3 large round bales down to Savannah, Georgia. We did some work down there with the pulp and paper company. They thought it was fabulous product, just, and so then the owner looked at me, and as he's looking at this long, I guess it was a test tube full of this the slurry. He looks, how much of this stuff can you get? And I was kind of cocky because that was the first year of our overproduction, Chris, and that was and so I was going like, okay, so we do about 60,000 acres that year across Western Canada. So he said, how much of this stuff can you get? And I go, well, how much do you want? And he says, well, I go around through 300,000 ton a month of recyclable cardboard boxes or virgin hemp or virgin pulp. So I did quick calculation in my head. I had enough, if I got everything across Western Canada and was able to deliver to them, I had enough for 2 weeks. So that's, and that's the bottom of the barrel, that market, that's for pulp and paper. So, that's, then he started talking, well, maybe I'll only add 5%. When you recycle a cardboard box, and I don't need to go into and take a lot of this time here, but just if you recycle a cardboard box with wood pulp, you lose half of it. With hemp, you lose around 2 or 3%. So if we keep, he said, well, we'll have 5% hemp or 10%, whatever we can work out. And he was going to work with a specific company that he bought the used cardboard boxes back, and then he'd sell it back to them, and then buy the used them. So eventually, after about 13 or 14 recycling the same boxes, you'd have 100% hemp box, and then you don't have to have 2 or 3%. Then you'd go on to the next company, and that's how he was going to build it up. And I guess as far as the cotton, there's some there's some jeans now that you can buy that's 5% hemp, right? So that's just, I guess, some of the, to make a bad story sound a little bit better, is that if you add a little bit of hemp to some of our products and make them last longer, that's the idea of it. Maybe we can get this all going too. But but it's, Christopher, as far as we honor our contracts. We've always bought all of our stuff back, that are all of our contracts with anybody, any of the growers that we are working. Even right now, we are just finishing going through our 2020 production. We had, and this is how we before COVID came along, we were really moving. We were going through probably around 300,000 to 400,000 pounds of hemp grain to produce hemp pellets or oil a week on the conventional side of things. A couple of things happened. We got Tilray bought us out. There were some changes. Tilray's all pro organic, and they didn't want to sell any of our conventional production. That's now changed. We got a different manager on the sales marketing team, and they got some really neat things coming along. But it's, I guess, like again, after 20 years or after 22 years, we're still going through a lot of growing pains. And we could say, I really think that if we could get the proper education in front of the public, I think that a lot of this would clear up. We asked, I can remember at a Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance conference, there was one person says, well, why don't you hold a national advertising like they do with the milk or a chicken or with beef or whatever, have a national advertising program, ads on TV, all that kind of stuff. And he says, that's just the way, he was from the dairy. He says, that's what we did. And our sales took off. And the reply back, or the question back to him was, well, how much did that cost? All that advertising? And it was $20 million. not too many people have $20 million in their back pocket just for advertising. And that's one of our biggest problems up here in Canada, is just the lack of funding and lack of education to the people. Anyhow, I said my piece. If you want to advertise, or if you want to grow, Chris, give me a shout back.
Cool.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Yeah.
Roman and Chris, do you guys have anything you want to add?
Well, yeah, not really. I mean, I appreciate your comments, and definitely all with you there. So, one of the big factors in the U.S. industry or hemp seed, okay, just the grain itself, was South Korea. They bought a lot of it from the get-go, from day one, probably from Canada way before that even. And then there was a pretty large oil seed scare that China decided to somehow come up with. So pretty much South Korea stopped buying oil seeds from the US like that day, like just done. So that definitely attributed to a lot of the oversupply in the US. That's why it went from $1.05 for conventional seed a pound to pretty much 50 cents. I mean, it hit a couple things in between there, but that's the biggest one that I can tell is the problem with it.
I just saw.
Yeah.
Daryl,
yeah,
seed
it was
not purchased.
The market of South Korea. Actually, it was our company that was over there that got them to import or legalize the importation of hemp. They kind of treated it like cannabis, right? So, but we got the importation of it.